right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Tonight we are with Marissa Levien, who wrote this awesome, super great book, The World Gives Way, which she has. And I also have this. This is my copy, though, guys.
Yeah, everybody gets one.
So Marissa is a writer and artist who hails from Washington State, as does the parking meter that you see in the background. And now lives in New York with a kindly journalist and their two cats. And The World Gives Way is her first novel, which, guys, is amazing because it is amazing first novel. It is so good and so awesome. And I was just gushing to Marissa about this before we started because I'm so excited that I get to talk with her. So
shucks, thanks.
All right, so let's dive in with let's talk about the ins and outs of The World Gives Way, which is amazing. So if you can tell us a little bit about the book and then the initial spark that set you off on writing it, I feel like there's probably a story behind that.
It's about, I'm not going to give too many spoilers or anything, but the book is about an apocalypse. And in terms of an initial spark, this is definitely a 2016 kind of book. Like, I think I started just having apocalypses on the brain, inexplicably, don't know why, around 2016. And
happy. I don't remember.
Yeah, who knows why, but sometimes these things just happen. And then I started to think about a story that wasn't so much sort of that Michael Bay Armageddon apocalypse version of a story where there's an asteroid coming to Earth. Quick, everybody, let's go. Let's get the nukes and let's figure out the problems and kiss the girl and probably get into a fist fight. I was much more interested in writing a story about people discovering that the world was ending and then just sort of having to sit with that information and learn how to live. And so, I was looking to a lot of books like, The Dreamers or Age of Miracles or The World Gives Way, for just sort of the mood for that. But so the basic setup is the world in this story isn't actually a world at all. It's a generation ship. It's this giant spaceship, roughly the size of Switzerland. The inside of the ship really just ends up looking kind of like the world that we have right here, right now. It has cities, it has lakes, it has mountains, it has scenery, but it's all artificial. And within this world, my main character, Mira, finds out at the very beginning from her boss that there's a crack in this ship that is gliding along through galaxies, and that because of this, everyone on board the ship is going to die. And then she decides to, what she does with this information is she decides to go on the run. She is an indentured servant within this sort of society that is there in the ship, and there's many indentured servants, and they're not supposed to leave their jobs, and if they do, then they get in trouble with the law. And so she only has so much time left. She knows that the world's ending, so she decides to go on the run and try and find the best life for herself. And eventually there's another character who's also a point of view character in the book named Tobias, who's a government worker who is tasked with going and chasing her down, and how those two interact, and how they sort of have a push-pull as the world is slowly disintegrating around them, and how they learn how to live is basically the story.
That, I know, it is so cool. I love Tobias, by the way. I love Mira. I love them all. You started off with hey, the world's ending. Oh, okay. All right. So I am wondering also, so as booksellers, we're always trying to find the best way to sell the books we love to our customers, as I will be trying to sell this to people. So my question for you is, if you were in front of readers, because you work at a bookstore.
Yes, I am a fellow bookseller. I work at...
Oh, yeah. She is a fellow bookseller, guys. That is why I also love her. So how would you sell your book to excited readers?
I would sell it For one thing, I'd sell it on comps because I feel like I have a lot of people come into the store who are super into sort of that cerebral version of science fiction, or that version of sort of like science fiction literature hybrid stuff where, there's science fiction to it, but also it's like really about the characters. Again, I mentioned Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel and Age of Miracles by Karen Thompson Walker, things like that. These books that are like really moody and are going for something aesthetically beautiful and for like very emotional character arcs and things that also do have sci-fi traits, especially dystopian ones. People that are interested in generationships would be very interested in my book. In fact, apparently my book pairs very well also with Andy Weir's latest book because they both do this insane amount of time. They spend this insane amount of time describing ships in different ways. If you like sci-fi with moodiness and heart, then this is your jam. It's got a lot of heart.
Oh, that is awesome. I'm totally stealing that, by the way. I'm going to steal it, and that's how I'm going to sell it to people. It's like, yes, and I can, and actually, I don't even have to say that I stole it. I can say, this comes from the author herself. It's like, buy it. Subliminal messaging, everyone, just buy it.
Buy it. It's been funny to watch, to work in a bookstore and have a book come out, because there are people that come up and they they will ask for things that I think are, sort of similar to what my book is. They'll be like, I really like sci-fi. I like sci-fi, but I like slow burn sci-fi, or I like Station 11, or I like, The Memory Police. And a part of me is like, oh, you'll want my book. But then I usually grab one of my coworkers and like, hey, can you talk about my book? Because it's going to look awful if I do it.
It's like, it's going to look awkward if I do it. It's like,
it's just going to make it seem like I just want the sale. And I'm like, no, I think you'll like it.
I'll like it, but I feel like they won't believe me.
I may be biased on this.
A little bit. That is awesome. So you did mention Station 11 already, and I know it's been compared to that, and I totally agree with that. Your book is basically, it's like Station 11, but in space, in a very... it reminds me very much of that. And so Station 11 is a standalone, I call it literary science fiction. I don't know if that's a correct term, but that's what I call it. And,
I call it that, yeah.
And it's a standalone one, and so is The World Gives Way. I don't want to give anything away to anybody, but I wanted to make sure that it was a standalone before we started, and it is. But they both work, but in sci-fi, a lot you see, the norm is like a series. There's a lot of series in sci-fi. Now, recently, there has been more of the standalone stuff, but though Station 11 and your book, they work really, really well as just, this is the story, and now we're done. But why did you decide to write a standalone novel in a genre that does really attract series more so than standalones?
First of all, this is my first book, and I frankly don't have a great attention span, so I didn't want to tackle something as hardcore as a series right out of the gate. Frankly, I'm not sure, maybe someday I'll get the balls to do something like that, but so far it's, it seemed better and more natural for me to do a standalone novel. And this story really felt like it wanted to be a standalone story. I mean, I guess I could have made it, without spoiling anything. I could have probably drawn everything out and, split the story that exists in this book into threes, but I think it kind of works best in the size that it is. And also I think, I'm a person that loves all genres simultaneously, so I'm constantly reading literary fiction, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, mysteries, nonfiction, a little bit of everything. And so maybe also I just wasn't keyed into the idea that that's naturally what you're supposed to do in science fiction. I just standalones tend to be the things that I read a lot, though I've been reading a lot of series lately, actually, and they're really great too. Because you get all those wonderful cliffhangers and you get to live in the world a little bit longer. But I think it coming from the reading background that I had, a standalone felt more natural.
And that makes sense. And honestly, yeah, I really think it works very well just by itself. Like, I mean, yeah, you could draw it out, but I don't think it would be as good if you tried to draw it like it wouldn't be the gem that it is if you tried.
It would be like the last 3 seasons of Lost. Nobody wants that, you know?
It's like, oh, you're still lost. Whatever. But so, and interestingly, I am wondering, and so this, I'm a little bit jumping around with some of the questions because a lot of the issues you deal with in here are pretty like big. One of them I feel is the climate change one, which I think that is like, I was reading it and I'm thinking, is this like a metaphor for climate change or something? Because it's like, and a lot of like, and so like books like that, like yours that deals with that kind of stuff, and then Station 11 ironically deals with a pandemic worldwide.
I've been trying to sell Station 11 to people, and it's really hard right now.
Yeah, it's really hard right now to sell that. Just so you know, it was written in like 2014, guys. She didn't know.
She didn't know.
But these kind of stories, they seem like really well, like it's, I'm not gonna say, like speculative fiction, science fiction, it seems like a really great place for those stories to live, and they do really well. Why do you think like that it draws that in? Like why, like instead of basically just writing like a contemporary novel of today about climate change, instead we're writing about the generation ship that has a crack in the hull and everybody's gonna die on it. Like,
yeah.
And yet it works. It works so, like, it
does.
It's such a popular thing to do, and people love it. And it's just kind of like, well, guys, you know, but then I feel like they wouldn't love it if it was contemporary and, like, on Earth. It would be like, oh, this is scary. Oh, but this is okay.
Yeah, what I'll say is that I never really set out to write anything that was a direct sort of allegory, if you will, on any of those subjects. I think it just sort of comes naturally when you're writing something like that, because you just start to, like, if you're writing something set in the near future, or you're writing something as extreme as everybody heads onto a generation ship, you then start having to think what realistically would occur in those situations, and you end up having to think a lot about society, both its like good points and flaws, and eventually you start to extrapolate stuff like, well, if this happens this way, it's going to feel a little bit like climate change. And also class systems are a problem, and like all of these things. And so I think, like, I do think that the social commentary that exists in science fiction, I think it really just comes naturally the second you just start to decide to write a story like that. But also I think it does help readers, like, take in issues like that when you do it like that, you know, the way that you were saying. Yeah. I think it's just good to, you know, it's good to Mary Poppins it. It's like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down type of a thing. You can have, you know, this manifesto of climate change, a la, say, Bill Gates just came out with one, and it's quite good. Everybody should go buy that book. But there is also a subset of people who, you know, quite fairly don't necessarily want to be lectured to during their reading time. Like, that's their downtime, and they want to be able to escape into something. And, you know, it turns out that you can totally escape into something and still think about society. And that's, you know, that's good points on both fronts.
There you go.
Yeah.
I've always, so, yeah, and that actually goes into, so I'm also the children's buyer at Town Book Center. So,
fun.
So, I have always said, like, fiction is a great way to help kids deal with tough subjects. But the truth is, fiction is also a really great way to help adults deal with tough subjects.
Yes. Yeah, I don't consider myself a serious person. And so, like, there are times when I will read the very intense, like, you know, philosophical manifesto nonfiction books. But 9 times out of 10, the thing that my poor non-serious brain wants to gravitate to is something that's got a witch or a spaceship in it. And if it turns out that you can still be discussing racism or climate change or class systems while you're doing that, like, all the better.
Yay. But yeah, I know. So, okay, now I'm really going to get into a little bit of writing stuff with you, because your book, seriously, it drew me in from just the first line. The thing that I was really fascinated with in just the first chapter was you kind of, at least to me, it felt like you started, because I was not totally aware that they were on a spaceship right away. I was by the end of the first chapter, but like in the beginning, it just kind of seems like some weird like version of Earth or something, like, which I guess technically it kind of is, but but like I was not aware that they were on a spaceship. So you start out with kind of like this narrow perspective of just Mira and the world that she, like the small world that she lives in is just, okay, so she's an indentured servant. She is in her room. She is this. And then as the chapter goes on, you like expand it to be like, by the end, you're like, oh my God, they're on a spaceship. So how did you do that? Like, how were you able to write the first chapter like that? And with knowing everything anyway, but you narrow it and then widen it out, which was really cool. And why did you decide to do it that way?
I first off, I really like books that do that kind of start you off in this like really narrow, specific place. Because I think the best openings to books are ones that really give you the character as quickly as possible. And like give you like this quick, beautiful understanding of the character and just a little specific something that you can sort of latch onto right away, and it'll kind of hook you. And so that was sort of what I was going for with that. And because the book is told from the perspective of Mira and Tobias later, sort of often back and forth. Both of them have a fairly close point of view. It's a third person close point of view. And so, within that, it made it pretty easy to just like stick with Mira and then have it slowly unravel that way without it feeling like any sort of a cheat. And so it really kind of felt natural to do it that way. And it was nice because then it was like, I also really love books. I feel like Neil Gaiman does this really well, where nobody like sits you down at any point and is like, okay, so here's the world, here are the rules of the world, here's this, and this is what you need to know. Like there's no exposition, you just sort of get thrown in. And then you get like enough clues assembled within the first few chapters that you can kind of put together what's going on, even if it is a very, very foreign place compared to our real world. And so I think I always just really admire books that did that. So I think that's probably why I chose to do it
that was, and yes, I really did, because you jump like right into Mira and you're like, yes, I love this girl. Let's keep going. Because you really get what she is. And then her now this doesn't, it's not really a spoiler because again, it's in like the first chapter, guys. I love that you added in the little baby Charlotte that she then takes care of. And, like, that is just, yes. And she's awesome. And it's just, and then like all of a sudden the world's getting bigger and I'm like, oh my God, they're on a spaceship and it's broken.
It's got a crack in it and there's nothing they can do.
I know. And that was the other thing I wanted to, so basically also in the first chapter, guys, you basically learned.
Yeah, this is the first like 30 pages.
The first like 30 pages or chapter or whatever. You learn that they're on a spaceship, there's a crack in it, they've already tried to fix it and they can't. The world is ending. And that is where Mira starts off with, oh, the world is ending. And like, there's really nothing they can do about it. And because they've already tried. And before, so my thing is for world building. So your world, you built it so brilliantly, but I found it sort of like a little, like, it's like a little funny because basically you're building a world that is ending. So you built this and just to end it. So like, how did you go about that? Was it any different than just building a world? Or did you have to like build the world and then also think about, how would this logically end?
So I think I did spend a lot of time thinking about the fact that it was ending, because one of the things that I just sort of had revolving around in my head, I won't even say that it was like a theme in the book, but it's just something that I always kind of think about, is that like, I thought it would be kind of beautiful to see something, or to see many examples that were like the heights of human achievement, and then simultaneously be aware that we are a tiny speck of dust, and at any moment we could be crushed, and it doesn't really matter in the sense of like the whole universe. Like it doesn't really matter. It does when you get into the nitty gritty of the characters, I think that I tried to really instill a sense of hope, even as I'm writing a book about how the world's ending. It's about these characters living their lives and finding ways to connect with one another and, become whole people as the world is ending. So like in this singular way, with a point of view, it does matter that the world's ending, but then also on a cosmic level, it really doesn't. And so to kind of have that push-pull of, something really beautiful. This is like, this ship is the height of human achievement. There are underwater cities. There are mountains made of stained glass. There are, there's a whole sky that's made entirely of metal and lights. There's horizon walls. It's this giant, beautiful space. It's been designed immaculately. And in the end, that is incredible, and it also doesn't matter. And how that can be like a push-pull and a good and bad in a lot of ways was something that really interested me.
That is so cool, because I was like thinking about this. I was like, world building's hard enough, but not only does she build the world, she also has to destroy it. It's like, oh my goodness. So I have, do you have any, techniques you use for your world building for any budding science fiction authors out there?
Yeah. So I can give you a specific example of how I tackled this, because it did go through some trial and error for sure when it came to putting this together. Because first off, when I was writing the book, my first notes that I was getting from people is that it needed more world building. I feel like with a lot of sci-fi authors, you actually end up getting the latter, or you get the opposite, where it's like, no, too much. We don't need to know how the pipes and the plumbing work in the spaceship, things like that. Because people will go just like full Tolkien and be like, I have appendices, here you go. But I was doing the opposite, and I was sort of I like to world build where you are giving the reader just enough for them to be able to see the picture, but not anymore, because for me, world building and just reading in general should sort of be a symbiotic relationship where you're presenting information to a reader, and then a reader is populating it with their imagination. So like anytime somebody reads a book, nobody's going to picture Mira exactly the same way. They're going to picture something similar each time, because I've described her and I say that her hair is thick and dark, and that she is small and thin because she's a starved indentured servant, and that she's got dark eyes, things like that. And so people will imagine her, but then they'll imagine her differently, depending on just their own imaginations and life histories and stuff. And I think that that's really cool about books. So I try not to go so deep that I'm just trying to control what the reader's picturing. I did have a problem with world building in this book, because there were people that weren't quite getting certain aspects of the book, and I can only do so much because I have only two characters' points of view, and they've lived in this world to the point where they take it for granted, and they don't, they wouldn't be sitting there imagining the mechanics of the ship or this or that. So I also, when it became a problem, I created these funny little interstitial chapters that are told from the point of view of a completely different entity. It's just an omniscient narrator who's telling you about the ship. And I tried to do it very poetically. And that was also a really good way for me to figure out elements of how the ship was going to break apart, because a nice omniscient narrator would be able to also tell you the future. And so this narrator can tell you, this is this city within this ship. Here is how this city came to be built, which is something that my characters probably wouldn't know. And here is how this city will die. And it allowed me to be kind of weird and poetic with it, and get a little bit more philosophical when I wanted to, and also sneakily throw in all of this world building stuff that there's no way that I could have thrown in with any chapters from Mira or Tobias's point of view without it being really shoehorned in exposition. So sometimes you do have to get creative. It's good to find workarounds rather than trying to shoehorn in that exposition. And also, for me, trying to keep world building necessary but minimal is always good.
Which is really good. And that's the mark of really when it's good, because you want to feel like you know so much about it that you must have read so many chapter, so many pages. And then my favorite thing is when I come to find, oh my gosh, I've only read like a paragraph, but I found everything.
I know. I'm constantly in awe of those writers that can write like novellas that blow your mind. I'm like, how did you gave me like the whole world in a sentence. How did you do that? Like, it's incredible. Anytime I see anything like that, I just bow down. Because I'm not sure I'm there yet, but it's always incredible.
You are definitely getting close. It is fantastic. So I kind of already touched on this, but obviously you did deal with some issues in this, not just climate change, but like you said, Mira is an indentured servant, which is like, because it's not really, you're not like a worker, you're like indentured, you're in debt, it's this whole thing. So, and all those other like class hierarchies, even just like the idea of like building up of cities and then them falling down. So what, did you have to do any research for this novel on any of those topics? Or
not, what I did research on more than anything, because a lot of research that I would do, say for class systems or climate change, really is just reading the news. And so I didn't end up doing any heavy research in terms of, the details of, say, climate change or our current class structure, because since it's a new future society, I get to cheat a little bit and just do my own thing with it. That's like the best part of sci-fi, by the way, is you can like tackle things, but also just sort of be like, but it's not this thing. So it's a little bit different, and I've imagined it entirely. So I don't have to like pour through a bunch of Library of Congress papers or anything. I mean, that's really fun sometimes, but, so it was more just a feeling that I was having about our current world and how I could see it unspooling in the future. But I did do a lot of research about our current world just in terms of different cultures, because the other element to this, and one that I wanted to make sure I really got right, was that because it's like the whole world's population, well, not the whole world's population, but a smattering of the population of the whole world inside a ship the size of Switzerland, and it's been flying through galaxies for the past 150 years. It's taken on a multicultural atmosphere, and it's taken on a flavor to it in terms of culture and society that would be very different from ours, but would just sort of be a mashup of everything that existed in the world before. So, like, suddenly within that, you have kimchi in a taco, you have different like cuisine elements, you have streets named all sorts of different hybridized things that are maybe part Korean, part Turkish, but it's set in New London. And or you'd have like, I did a decent amount of research into different world religions, because at one point the characters stop by a city that is sort of similar to, say, like a Mecca or a Jerusalem, where everybody's just sort of coming in, and it's sort of a religious pilgrimage of a place. And so within that, then suddenly you have all the world's religions and philosophies kind of intermingling and interplaying. And I wanted to find ways to make sure I got that right, but also ways to kind of have fun with that and mash them together to create new things, as I would imagine would probably happen if you shoved a bunch of people from all different countries into a single small space.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. So that was another thing you mentioned, like in science fiction, you can cheat a little bit because you can't imagine it. But one thing I've often heard from authors is that with world building, once you imagine it, you can imagine anything, but once you imagine it, you have to stick to the rules that you have now created for yourself.
Yes.
Did you find that difficult?
There's like one very specific instance of this being very difficult. I'd say for the most part, I did okay. I was like, okay, so I know I have a picture in my head of the mechanics of how this ship spins and how the gravity works and this and that. So that problem was mostly making sure that I could convey that to the reader. But then I did this thing at the very beginning that I thought would be a really cool detail, which was I decided that in this world, paper is almost non-existent. Like, you have some antique books and pieces of wood and stuff that have been brought in from the old world, but no new paper is being generated. It's all just digital, because when you're in space, you really try and avoid fires. that was my logic to it, was like, well, whenever you hear about people going up into space, they tend to keep flammable objects to a minimum because, it's an enclosed space. There's only so much air. And if there's a fire, it could be the death of you. So I was like, great, there's no paper in this world. And then I wrote 400 pages of something. And the number of times that I went through with copy editors and they're like, hey, you said that there was no paper, but now she's getting a receipt. Is this like a digital receipt, or is it a piece of paper? Or like somebody would eat food and it would be out of a paper bag, just because like that's like sort of an autopilot thing that you do as you're describing stuff. And so it was an issue, and I had to think about it a lot. And also, thank God for copy editors. I have a shrine in my closet now to copy editors. I love them so much because I think they caught every single instance of it, and there was a lot of them. And because I thought it would be so simple. I'm like, okay, so yeah, they have tablets instead of notepads, and they don't have a lot of books. That's on tablets too, and it'll be easy. And it's like, no, there's a lot of stuff in the world that's made of paper, as it turns out.
We just don't even think about it. Like, yeah, like I didn't even think about it. Like, oh yeah, a receipt would be paper, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's just one of those autopilot things as you're writing. It's like a small utilitarian something that you're not even thinking about as you type it out. It's just like, yeah, and then, or like there was a ticket or a something, and it's like, nope, there wouldn't be a ticket. Nope, that's not how that works.
That's right. It's like, oh, there wouldn't be, would there? No. It's like, oh my gosh.
So I was cursing myself a bit, though I do think it was a good choice in the end. I think it was a nice detail, but it was one that I lived to regret in terms of just how much work it was.
It is a nice detail, and it makes total sense. You're in a spaceship. They probably wouldn't really want to take a lot of paper.
Yeah, and like they got a finite amount of trees, I think they'd want to keep it as is, but yeah.
Yeah, probably. It's like, but then again, as it turned out, it didn't really matter.
No, there wasn't a fire that got them in the end, but something got
I know. Oh my gosh. So, now I really want to turn to the character of Mira because I love her so much. and I found her, this was my view of her. She's very strong female protagonist, but she's strong in a way that isn't like flashy. It's not, she doesn't get superpowers all of a sudden. She has no like big futuristic weapons. She's like, it's like the quiet strength that's still like super like tough. And she's sort of in like, so she learns the world is ending, and in a very finite amount of time, you see her kind of rise above. She was an indentured servant. She just kept her head down. And now she's like on the run fugitive. And she's strong in a quiet, like no flashy, like kind of way. Like it basically, what I liked, her strength solely comes from her. Like it's from her. It's not, she didn't like get blasted with gamma rays or something. Like, it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but
I love the Hulk. He's great.
But I feel like, so why did you choose to write Mira in this way? And like making her story really believable, which sounds weird when you say that, but it is. It's a very believable, like she's a very believable character to me because she doesn't have those superpowers. She doesn't have big weapons all of a sudden. She's not suddenly some sort of super genius. And it's a kind of strength, especially in female characters, that I feel like isn't seen a lot. Whenever there's a female protagonist that's like super strong, it's always like she has superpowers or she has like all this stuff. Like Mira is this small, normal woman who is now faced with extraordinary circumstances to overcome. So why did you choose to make her this way? And why do you kind of think that her quiet, non-flashy kind of strength is not often seen in books as much as the flashier kind?
Yeah, so for me with Mira, I already had a giant generation ship and all this other stuff, so I really wanted to keep Mira as grounded as possible, and I wanted to have that sort of specificity and complexity of a character that makes you like really, really connect to her, and for me, that meant kind of keeping her grounded in a certain number of ways. I really wanted to write a character from the get-go. I wanted to write a character that was sort of on the bottom rung of society, and she's an indentured servant. And so realistically, as I was thinking this through, I'm like, okay, so she wouldn't be super well educated because they don't really care that much about educating people in indentured servitude. And, she doesn't have a lot of spare time to go to the gym and pump iron. She's probably pretty strong, but in that way that you're strong because you're hauling the trash out all the time. And, she's not ripped. She's got a certain look to her where she's just seen some stuff. And so she looks ragged in a lot of ways. And I wanted to stay true to that if I was going to write a character that was on the bottom rung of society like that. The type of strength that I imagined her having would have to be more something to do with manipulation, street smarts, things like that. Like I was reading the Odyssey when I was rereading the Odyssey when I was first writing like my first draft of this, and one of the things that I really like about Odysseus as a character is he is like a Marvel superhero in that kind of annoying way where it's like, yeah, he's super strong and all the ladies love him and, and everybody thinks he's so cool. But like the thing that he does best is he lies. He's really good at lying. And I really liked the idea of a character that wasn't a goody two shoes, who doesn't have a lot of legs up in life. In fact, she basically has none. Like nobody's going to do her a favor ever. And so everything she's ever gotten in life, she's had to manipulate her way into getting it. And so she lies as easily as she breathes, and she's really good at it. And it was really fun to write a character like that just like mostly knows how to do things by stealing and cheating. And I find that much more compelling than, say, a kind of a Mary Sue sort of a character that's like very perfect and strong and inexplicably is really good at martial arts, even though never had the time to train, but it's just there, and you're right. That is a really popular thing to do. I think you see it a lot in movies, especially. I feel like maybe just because it's like harder to take the time to flesh out the character in a way that would be different than that. They just want to like get the shortcuts through. And I think at this point, people will believe it if you throw a 90-pound woman on screen and say, yes, she can pick up a car or she can survive 5 bullets or anything like that. I think we're trained to be accepting of that, and that's kind of its own fun fantasy. Like I will watch Lara Croft Tomb Raider on repeat and be very happy about it. But it's nice to find different versions of strength, and I think it's important to show different versions of strength, that both because it's just nice to have different types of characters in the world, but also in terms of like female characters. I grew up with a lot of female characters that I really idolized because they could, kick and punch and be amazing. Like I was obsessed with the TV show Alias when I was a teenager. Like that's one for that. But as I've gotten older, I love those types of stories, but simultaneously I love stories where it turns out that a female character can be strong, not necessarily by doing masculine energy things, but also by doing sort of the things that this is a weird cliche, but like quote unquote like come more naturally to women, something like that, where instead of like I'm going to do what a male action hero would do in this scenario, which is like punch something, and instead be like, okay, well, I'm going to use my wiles, I'm going to think through this, I'm going to I'm going to manipulate the situation, things like that, to be able to give female characters strength in many different forms and not always have it just be like I know judo is kind of nice.
I did think it was nice because it really does create this connection with Mira, because in a very strange way, like I like those movies too and books where they have like super strong and they can do all this crazy stuff, and you're like, well, how did you ever learn how to do? Well, it doesn't matter how you learned how to do that, you're doing it. Yeah. And like, who doesn't love like Miss Marvel? Like she can just do anything and it's fine. But I could never see myself as Miss Marvel. I could see myself as Mira. Like, I could see myself doing that. I can't do what Miss Marvel does, but I could do what she does. Like, that is much more of a connection. Like, oh, you're a real person. Hi.
Yeah. And, you know, like, God forbid, hopefully none of us will ever be in a situation where we're on a spaceship as it's slowly breaking apart. But
yeah.
I like to think, you know, that if I were suddenly thrown into, you know, any number of movie style conflicts, that I probably wouldn't be able to, like, take people down by doing that. There's that one move that, like, every single female superhero does where she jumps up and wraps her legs around a guy's neck and then takes him down that way. That always looks so cool. And in a million years, I will never be able to do that.
I'm like, no, I can't do that.
But, you know, maybe I could talk my way out of a situation. Maybe I could think my way out of a situation. If it came to physical violence, I'm sure I could get some stuff done. Maybe I'll smash somebody with a fire extinguisher. You know, that's an option for you. Something that Mira manages to pull off at one point in the book. No spoilers, but I won't say anything more about it. But, like, you know, you can do all sorts of things without it necessarily having to be, I am master of the universe, you know?
I know, yeah, I could pick up a fire extinguisher. I can't pick up a car and throw it at you, but I could, like, grab something and be like, yeah! It really
Exactly.
is something that I can actually lift and hope that it at least distracts you long enough that I can get away. Yeah. Like, that's, like, yep, that's awesome. So, and just in general, especially, I feel like I talk about this a lot with also fantasy authors as well as science fiction authors. It feels like there's this feeling of, like, strong female protagonists and female authors in science fiction is still not really seen as a normal thing, even though there are a good number of them, but it's still seen as, this is, like, quote unquote, a man's world. So, do you feel that women are actually underrepresented in science fiction, or does it just feel like they are? And why do you think that is?
I think it's getting better, because I do think that in terms of contemporary science fiction, you're seeing so much more, specifically in, like, science fiction and fantasy spheres. You're seeing so much more representation of people of color, of LGBTQA, all of that stuff. And you're getting a lot more representation of female characters and female authors than you're doing in a lot of other spheres of culture. I think maybe just because, like, sci-fi and fantasy is populated by a bunch of weirdos from the get-go, we just, like, are ready to let our freak flags fly a little bit more. But I do think there's still a lot of room to go, even if it's, you know, I think I'm seeing, like, tons more diversity in authorship and in terms of characters, but also, like, within that, you still get some of the old guard occasionally doing blowback, you know, things like that within that sphere. I'd like that to go away. I think people need to understand that the inclusion of all of these new voices doesn't necessarily mean the exclusion of some of the amazing white guys of the past. Because, like, I love Ray Bradbury. I love Douglas Adams. I love all of these, you know, like, that's not going to go away just because you're bringing new voices in. What I hope for is someday a plane of existence in all cultural spheres, honestly, like movies, literature, everything, where nobody's making a big stink out of any of it ever, because it's just become so rote that there are this plethora of voices from, you know, different spheres of gender, sexuality, race, all of that sort of stuff, to the point where nobody has to be mad anymore if a book was written by a white guy or a black woman, because they're all common. And it's going to be a while before we get that, but I do think that it's not there yet. But sci-fi and fantasy specifically is doing an admirable job growing in that direction.
That is really cool. Yeah, because the underrepresentation of women in sci-fi and fantasy is talked about, but I go over in the bookstore and I'm like, so many of these were written by women. So is it just feels like it is that way, and it's just like, so, or is it really like you're saying, like everyone makes a big thing about it because like they think it's not normal?
I think the contemporary stuff especially is getting much more diverse. Again, I'll say that I'm not sure if it's fully there yet. Because also, like, all of us only see whatever sphere of the book world that we want to see sometimes, because, like, I know that my Twitter algorithm is only a certain way, and that way involves a lot of different diverse voices, because I like reading that stuff, and those are the people that I follow because I find, because they're giving off interesting opinions and they are great writers. And I think that there's probably a world of sci-fi that I'm not even seeing, where there's gatekeepers of it still, and it is just a bunch of dudes. And the second that somebody comes out, like with a book like C.L. Clarke's The Unbroken, for example, or if you're going more classic, something like Octavia Butler, suddenly they'll kind of like shove that to the side, and that'll just never be the thing that they talk about. I do think that that still happens, but I think it's getting much better, and I'm very happy about that.
Yay. That is awesome. Yes. Okay, so I'm now going to ask you about, this is your debut novel. So The World Gives, it is, and so I would like to know what your debut author's journey has been like, and was there anything that surprised you about the publication process?
I had a shockingly good time with a lot of it. My process was that I wrote this during an MFA. I got my MFA from Stony Brook University. Woo woo. They were really great to me. And I had a lot of really good strokes of luck happen to me. Like, for example, my agent is this amazing woman named Sarah Bedingfield. I love her. We connect on many levels, and we love all the same books, and she's great. And I met her during agent meetings that were provided by the MFA program, which is a very common thing, where you they bring in a few agents and you can set up little 10-minute snippet meetings, and they'll have read, 10 pages of your book, and they'll give you notes. And usually that's kind of the end of it. And sometimes you get lucky, but I got really lucky. I was in my second year of the MFA program. I was about, like a year and a half, 2 years in. And, she'd read 10 pages of my book, but also she was seated in a classroom where the day before a workshop had mapped out the entirety of my book in bullet points, like from beginning to end. This very beat by beat detailed outline was just on these two giant chalkboards right in front of her, staring at her the entire time that she did these meetings. And so she did meetings all afternoon staring at this chalkboard that's just the plot of my book. And then I came in, and the first thing she said to me, she was like standing up and she was staring at this chalkboard, and she pointed at the chalkboard and she's like, "That's you, right?" And I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "I really like this." and then we took it from there, and I graduated, and then a few months out of graduation, we'd been doing edits of the first draft of the book, and we took it to we pitched it to publishers, and it went through a few rounds. I was biting my nails the whole time, but ultimately, again, we found a really great publisher in Orbit, and it's an imprint of Orbit called Red Hook, but it's officially published through Orbit. And my editor, Angeline Rodriguez, is amazing, and I had a wonderful time working with her. And I feel like whenever you see this stuff in movies or representations of writers in fiction, it's always like this give and take, or like you're in like this crazy loud room and everybody's arguing, or this stuff is happening, or somebody's screwing you over somehow. And everybody's been really lovely. Angeline gave me edits, and almost universally everything she said, I just looked at it, was like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Like, this is perfect. This works really well. You understand my book. You understand my writing style. It was really nice. And I had expected it to be much more of a fight, because in a prior life before this, I'd worked in theater, and in theater, even when you get an agent, I feel like everything you do tends to be a fight. In kind of a fun way sometimes, but you're just like constantly fighting to be seen. It is when you're starting out in theater, that tends to be a thing. and it's easy to get lost in the shuffle a bit more. And unlike that kind of business model, publishing turned out to be something entirely different, where like everybody was really on my team because it was their baby as well at that point. You know, it wasn't mine alone. My agent considered it, just as much of a priority for her. My editor was the same way. And so I felt incredibly supported. And I honestly was quite surprised that was the way that turned out, because you don't assume that that's the way that that's going to happen.
You don't, but that is so great that it did. Yay!
Yeah, I know. It's like, it was nice. I was like, this is so nice. I didn't expect it to be nice. You're all lovely people. This is great.
So basically, what surprised you about the publication process was like everything in the publication process.
Yeah, there were like no assholes. Everybody was really nice.
Everybody was nice. It was like weird. I was not expecting that. Oh my gosh. So another thing is, you have been promoting your book a lot yourself on like social media and whatnot. Yeah. And a lot of authors don't really think to do this because it's not as much fun as writing the book for most people. But why is promoting your books yourself, not just, letting the publicity team at the whatever publisher you are, even if you're not self-published, why do you think it's so important to promote yourself? And do you have any tips for writers on how to do this?
So I do my best. I'm not the model. I know that you talked to Hannah Witten earlier. Hannah's the most incredible at this. She's very good at this game. I'm like mid-level at this point when it comes to social media. Like, I think I'm getting a bit better at it, type of thing. But yeah, I do think it's really important for authors to promote their books. One of the main reasons is like, the publicity team really does have your back, and they're really great. And if you're an author and you're at the point where you're getting ready to publish your first book, and this is sort of your first foray into it, like, the publisher wants you to do well, so they're gonna do all the publicity that they can, but also ultimately, like, you're the face of the book. And so it like, the thing that people are going to latch onto isn't necessarily, like, they'll latch onto it a bit when Orbit says, hey, Marissa Levien is great and you should go check out this book. But they're going to latch onto it more if I'm saying it, because I am Marissa Levien. And so I do think it's really important. And it also, it's a team effort, and it is just, it's one of those things for me anyways, where I'm a debut author. I've only just recently come into this world. And so every little bit helps. Like, authors don't make tons of money, and we really want to, I personally really, really want to have this book do well enough that the publisher will continue to like me and they'll let me publish another book someday, because all I want to do is just keep writing things. I just want to keep telling stories. It's my favorite thing. And if that means that I have to be a publicity monster, then that's what I'm going to do. And social media is a crazy, crazy place. And it's this weird artificial world, but it can be a lot of fun if you do it, if you space it out the right way and you don't let yourself get too stressed out about it. And yeah, every single little bit of visibility, of mentions, of discussions of the book helps. If it just means that one more person gets that book in their hands, then I'm satisfied, because I want to make sure that at the end of the day, I did everything that I could for something that I worked so hard on and loved so much. I want to make sure it really gets its fair shake.
That is really cool. And yes, I did talk with Hannah. She was awesome. She talked about you too. Because I brought up the fact you guys have been sort of like retweeting about each other's events, which we very much appreciate. We're like, yes, we did not know you guys were friends until that started, because we were like, man, we could have had them both on together.
I mean, hell, I'm always happy for that. Hannah's hot. She'll up my numbers, so No, Hannah's lovely, and I got to do an Instagram live with her a little while back, and it was so much fun. But yeah, as a person that's like a little bit newer to the social media game, and like, just again, like doing my best and making sure that I like, put it out there as much as possible. I look at Hannah's mastery of it sometimes. I'm like, damn, how do you do that? It's all so artful, and it's like of a piece, and it's all aesthetically pretty, and it's got this mood to it. And it's like, you're just really good at it.
I know. Oh my
God. That book is really good. She's not just good at social media. Everybody should go read For the Wolf. It's really good.
For the Wolf is also another one of yours, and hers are like my two top picks. So I was so excited I get to talk to you both. I was like, yes. Oh my gosh. All right. So here's some more, which I think it's a fun question. I hope you think it's a fun question. So obviously, like science fiction, it attracts a lot of like really voracious readers. Like if you get someone who's into sci-fi, they're really into it and they're very excited. So we're always getting requests. I'm sure you guys are too at your store for recommendations on like, oh, I just finished this book and now I need another one. It's like, okay. So they blow through books, they blow through series, they want more. So do you have recommendations for people once they've blown through The World Gives Way? Like what would you like?
Yeah. Because again, like I think it's going to be similar to books that I mentioned before, just in the sense that there's like certain books that I feel like share the same like mood board with my book, both in terms of content, but also like, this is kind of like a moody, empathy-filled, human connection-filled kind of a book. And so I'd say you'd want to do similar stuff to that. So Station 11 is a huge one for me. When I started writing this book, I was so in love with Station 11. And they give you that advice that you should always try and write the book that you want to read all the time. And I was like, I want to read Station 11 all the time. So I just want to write a book as good as Station 11. So that one for sure. A lot of stuff by Karen Thompson Walker. I guess she's written mainly the two, which would be The Dreamers and Age of Miracles. Age of Miracles especially is really beautiful. And then also The Memory Police by, I think it's Yuko Ogawa is her name. But that book knocked my socks off and is another one of those books where it appears on its face to be one thing and ends up just being like full of emotions and humanity. It when you read the back of it, you're like, oh, this is like a standard dystopia. Like I remember reading the back of it and being like, it's kind of George Orwell-y. But then I started reading it and it turns out to be nothing like that. In fact, it's just full of these beautiful aesthetic, poetic images and humanity, and it's really beautiful. And it's moody and it's sad, but it's that good kind of sad that, just leaves you feeling fulfilled after you've read it. And that's the kind of stuff that I like.
Which is so true of your book too. It leaves you really fulfilled, guys. Like it really, it does. It's such a, it sounds weird to say this because you learn in the first chapter, hey, the world's ending. It's so hopeful. I like it's kind of hard to explain that so if you haven't read it yet, but it kind of leaves you feeling like, the hope of humanity.
I really tried to make sure that I didn't write and I like this book, but I didn't want to write this book. I really tried to make sure it wasn't something akin to like, say, Cormac McCarthy's The Road, where it's like just bleak all the time. Oh that book is simultaneously one of the best written books I've ever read, but also it like sometimes feels like it's like the psychological equivalent of smashing your head against a wall repeatedly, but like well written. And I didn't want it to feel bleak. I wanted it, I wanted it to feel just like humane, if that makes sense.
It really does. And it's one of those things where I'm like, it is hard to describe why the end of the world is hopeful. But if you read it, you understand. But all right, so we are getting to the end here, and so the way I ended, I like to ask: is there anything new that you're working on right now that you would like to share with us, or can share with us?
Yeah, I can. That's the nice thing too about not doing series is like there's sometimes it's a little easier. It's easier when you're just doing one-offs to be like, yeah, I'm thinking of a story and it's great, but I'm currently writing. My next book that I'm writing right now actually isn't science fiction at all, but it's a ghost story, and I'm having a lot of fun writing a ghost story. It's a haunted house story, and I'm setting it on the Oregon coast, which makes me happy because that's where I'm from, and I'm from Washington State, but also we lived on the Oregon coast a lot as well, right. And it's the Oregon coast, for folks that don't know, is incredibly beautiful with these gigantic, thick, dense, impenetrable forests that look like something straight out of a fairy tale, and it's always very moody and foggy and rainy, and so it's like the perfect place to set a ghost story. And so I'm writing this haunted house book, and I'm having so much fun with it, and I'm in love with my characters right now, and it's mostly just me shoring up a draft of that, which will hopefully be going through the process generally soon. But it's been a lot of fun to write. And I love hopping. I love always kind of doing something fantastical, but hopping around genres a little bit. So I've been like dying to write something spooky. And also that means that as I'm writing this, I just get to read a lot of really good Gothic horror novels. And that's just the best. So it's been a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome. I want to read it so badly. I love that kind of story too. So
yeah,
the same wavelength. Write it, I will read it.
Absolutely. We're vibing. We get it.
Oh my gosh. And so last question that I have is that I always like to ask, what is one of the most recent books you've read and enjoyed? And as a bookseller, I'm sure you have something.
I do. I've always got a bunch of those in my back pocket. I'd say, so this came out last year, but I just haven't stopped talking about it. And it's the book that I've been like just trying to shove into people's hands. Be like, don't ask me questions. Just read it. Just do it. Don't. You think you don't want something fantastical, but you do. And it's this. I went absolutely nuts for Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Did you read that?
I didn't, but I so want to, man.
It's so good. It's for one thing, talking about like these writers that can serve you up the world in a sentence. Like Susanna Clarke's last book was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is like the size of a brick. It is so big, and it's so yeah, like it's a doorstop. It's so huge, and it's really good. But it's like it's this giant monstrosity of a book, and then this one is like a cool 200 some pages, and it's like every single sentence is perfect, and it's so pretty, and it makes you feel so good about humanity, because the main character, I won't really spoil the story too much. He's trapped in this world, and he's kind of an amnesiac. He doesn't remember much about himself, and he's just fundamentally good. And the way that the story unfolds, he ends up triumphing by being a good person, which is like, again, like we just went through 2020 and the 3 years before that. And the idea of this beautiful, fantastical story about a man trapped in this world with giant, beautiful marble statues and strange tides sweeping through the halls of this giant mansion house world thing. And simultaneous with that, he's just a really good person who sees wonder in everything. It just like made my heart grow 3 sizes. It was incredible. It was such a beautiful book. So that would be one. And then in a completely opposite turn, because it's not a fantastical book at all, but it's just, if you're looking for some of the best writing that you've ever read, and some of the best, most visceral characters you've ever read, I recently read Brandon Taylor's short story. Like it's an interconnected short story novel called Filthy Animals, and all it, on its face, all it is it's a bunch of grad students in the Midwest interacting with one another, and falling in lust, falling in love, getting into fights. And he writes in such a way that like everything that the characters do, even like really subtle things, feel really, really visceral. And so like as you're reading what he's writing, it's so physical that like as you're reading it, I'm like suddenly aware of the blood pumping under my skin. It's really crazy. It's just so tactile and physical. It's just really incredible writing. So Filthy Animals is also really incredible.
That is awesome. Oh my gosh. So we are now just wrapping up. So thank you all for coming and being here and listening to our fun chat. But one more thing before I go, I need to just plug the store, Town Book Center, guys. You can get Hannah's book from us. You can order it on our website at townbc.com. And not Marissa, I'm so sorry.
You can get Hannah's book too.
You can get Hannah's book too.
You should get both of them, like as a pair.
Both of them together. Yeah. Because I am so sorry, Marissa, because we were talking about it. Oh my gosh.
No, anyway, it's such a good book. Do not be sorry. It is a great book.
So is yours. And if you get Marissa's book, you can get one of these lovely signed book plates that she sent to us. Because, yes, you want to get this now. You want to get it for the kid. And, now that we're in there, Hannah gave us signed book plates too. So get both of them. And get the set of signed book plates.
Come to think of it, I think I'm probably going to have to go onto your store and order a copy of Hannah's book because I only got an e-copy because I got to read it ahead, which is always really exciting and fun. And it's like this lovely abuse of power. But I only got an e-copy and I really need a physical one. It's unfortunate that I don't have one. So I'll have to buy one off of you guys.
Yay. And then... So come in or go online or call us and we can give you The World Gives Way because it's wonderful. Yay. And so is Marissa. Thank you so much for being here.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, guys. Bye.
Bye, everybody.